Hey everybody, my name's David, and this is a project that I've wanted to start for a while, and so I'm just going to do it. So this I want to be sort of an informal conversation that I'm having with you, the parents of emergent bilinguals, as they're called, English learners, limited English proficient. These are all phrases and terms that have been used in the past and current that basically mean if you have a student in public school who you speak another language at home and your student has been assessed and they've scored below the proficiency level for English proficiency. So public schools are so that is sort of where we are, but this what I want to talk about now is what is this word EB, and let's see, what is my first one? Where did this go? Who are the question is, who are EBs and why do they matter? So first of all, we need to define what EB means. It means emergent bilingual, and this is 2023, and this is the new term that in the state of Texas they've adopted to communicate a student who speaks a language other than English at home and is in the public school system and has been assessed with an English proficiency assessment and determined to not meet the level of English proficient speaking peer. So this term has gone through many different changes over the year. You may know it as ESL, English as Second Language. You may know it as EL, an English learner. You may know it as LEP, Limited English Proficient. They're always changing the acronym, but underneath it's the same thing. It is the school has identified the student as not English proficient. And since since all of the instruction, unless you're enrolled in a bilingual education program, is in English, it's important for schools to be able to know, measure, and progress monitor English proficiency. So why do they matter? Why do schools even do this in the first place? There's actually quite an involved history of court cases that have ended up with the federal government mandating to states that, one, they have to identify students who speak languages other than English at home, or if the student themselves speak the language other than English, assessing the proficiency and monitoring the progress and providing opportunities for meaningful instruction in the English language. It goes back to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is basically what all the court decisions kind of go to, that you can't discriminate upon race or national origin, which really implies language. The legal terminology doesn't specifically say you can't discriminate based upon language, but it does say you cannot discriminate based upon national origin. So there have been quite a few court cases. There have been some in California, some in Texas, some of the landmark cases that have basically paved the way for what we do in public schools related to multilingual students. Some of those court cases are Lau versus Nichols, which was in 1974. I believe this is the one, off the top of my head, is in California, where the school district were not supplying any extra resource. They didn't see any need to have to accommodate students who didn't speak English. They thought, well, we speak English here, you just kind of sink or swim. But there was a court case, and basically the court decided that you have to provide meaningful instruction for the students. You have to make sure that they understand what you're teaching them, the resources, and giving them the opportunity to learn the language as they're learning the content. Plyer versus Doe, which is in 1982, is a Texas case where a school district decided that they didn't feel that they needed to educate students who couldn't provide citizenship status, who were not documented immigrants. So this court case made it all the way up to the Supreme Court, and in a narrow margin of victory, in 1982, the Supreme Court made the ruling that public schools are not institutions of immigration, that they're institutions of education, and basically the community has a vested interest in having an educated population. So regardless of whether or not these young students are in your community, they are part of your community, and the community will be better if the community is educated than if in our communities that we have students or children who are not educated who become second-class citizens. Sort of goes against the foundational principles of, in my opinion, American democracy, that says we don't judge based on creed, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic, but we're committed to a set of ideals. And undergirding those set of ideals is an educated population. You can't have a democracy without an educated population. And so in the end, that's me speaking, not the court, but in the end, the court said these people are in your community. We don't need second-class citizens in our communities in this country. You're not an institution of immigration, and so it's your role to educate these children regardless of their immigration status. And so that was a huge landmark case in the Supreme Court. Also, it's worth noting that in Texas and California are the only two states in the country that actually require bilingual education. So this is a state law. I can speak for Texas more than I can for California because I work in Texas. I've also worked in states that do not have bilingual education. But there's a lot of bureaucratic details. If you read through the education code, it can be really tedious. But basically, if a school district has more than 20 students of a certain language group, they are required, I put in quotation marks, to provide bilingual education. Now, many bilingual education programs in the state of Texas are Spanish-English bilingual education programs because, one, you have to be able to hire certified staff in order to staff a bilingual education program. So, for example, if a school district has more than that certain number of subgroup students in their community, but they cannot create a program based upon the lack of qualified people to actually teach the students, they can apply for a waiver. So I don't work in those departments, but my guess is there's quite a few waivers that are sent to the Texas Education Agency. I have heard of in Texas that I've come across since I've been here. I've been working in Texas since 2020. I know I've heard of a Vietnamese bilingual program somewhere I had a student transfer from. And, of course, I work at a district that has Spanish language bilingual education program. I'm sure there are other languages that are represented across the state. I'm just not aware of them. But that's sort of the nuts and bolts of those programs. But those programs come out of these court cases. They come out of this federal requirement that says to schools you can't discriminate against students based upon their lack of speaking English. So you're obligated to provide some type of support service. Not only are you obligated to provide that support service, but you're obligated to identify who these students are, and you're obligated to monitor their progress annually, which is called accountability. So, all of this to say, it's a lot of information, but all of this to say, get back to the question of who are EBs. So those students are EBs, emergent bilinguals. They're students who the district has identified, and I will get into in the next episode, how students are identified in the district and how they are classified as EB based on assessments. We're not just picking students who maybe even speak another language. It's based on assessment data. But it's the foundational principle is, if a student lacks English proficiency, that there is a support structure to support those students through their education, because in the end, the goal of the public education institution is to provide the community, which funds the adventure through tax dollars, is to provide back to the community from their investment in us an educated population. That's the idea and principle. It is a very complicated system, and I won't get into all of that, but fundamentally, that's the idea. And that even if students don't speak the predominant language of English, the language that most of the instruction, again, unless you're in a dual language program, if you're not in a dual language program, all of the instruction will be in English, is to provide a chance for those students to have what would be called equitable access to the curriculum. That despite their lack of understanding, of speaking, of writing and reading in the English language, that they're provided with a support system to help them not just understand conversational, social English, but the actual language of the classroom, the academic language, which is why they're there, to be educated, to learn the content of language arts, of English literature, of mathematics, of social studies, of science. All of these things are essentially important to having an educated student. So that is who an EB is, and that's why it matters. That's why it matters. It doesn't take much of a Google search to look at the history of education and the indigenous population in this country and see the difference of education before this Civil Rights Act and after. It's two different worlds. It's two different worlds in principle. That doesn't mean it always functions that way, because local schools and local boards and local administrators and teachers are all different. So we'll talk more about in the future of what do you need to look for as a parent to make sure that your child is in a school that really does value that equitable access to the language and to the content. Because it's not the same everywhere. I'm sorry to tell you. You're going to need to educate yourself on what is best for your own children. And that's really my purpose in what I'm doing. This is my 17th year in education, and I'm kind of ashamed to admit that what I have believed in the past is that schools can provide all that's needed to educate the child. That if they find good teachers, if they are in good schools, if there are people there who are emergent bilingual support faculty like that I've worked as for 16 years, that the students can find success. And that's true in a lot of ways. There is immense value in a positive, effective school culture, faculty, and administration, board, and district. Trust me, I've been in this long enough to see it work well and to see it not work well. and the outcome on the students has an impact. That being said, I don't know that there's any way to quantify this, but I'm starting to believe that the biggest lever there is to pull on is the parent lever. That is to say, the more educated and the more engaged the parent, the home culture is, the more benefit we're going to get out of the student. Nobody knows your child like you do. And you will know how to get the most out of them. And then if you can leverage educating yourself on the process of what's happening with your student in the school and collaborate, the idea is in the end to be a collaborator with your teacher, your student will succeed. I mean, I can't guarantee it 100%, but your child will have a much better chance of educational and academic success the more you are educated about what's happening, the more you can support what's happening in the schools, and the more you can ask questions when questions need to be asked of the teachers, of the administration, or even of the district. So that's my goal in the end, because there's no more interesting student to me than the emergent bilingual student. They're just the best, in my opinion. I won't chase that rabbit. I'll be able to talk much more about that as we go. But I wanted first to lay the groundwork for what I want to discuss with you in these episodes. So I appreciate your time and listening, and I look forward to sharing more with you in the future. Take care.